the grand chessboard of 19th century Europe, few players were as brilliant or as ruthless as Otto von Bismarck. There were kings, schemes, empires clashed, and alliances changed like the wind. But one man moved with uncanny precision, born not into royalty, but into the Prussian aristocracy. Bismarck rose through the ranks with one goal in mind: a powerful, unified Germany led by Prussia, not Austria, and he knew he couldn't demand it. He would have to engineer it, step by step, word by word, without letting Europe unite against him. Over the course of just 7 years, Bismarck engineered 3 wars, each one meticulously planned, each one moving to the German states closer to unity. He famously declared, not through speeches and majority decisions, but through blood and iron shall the great questions of the day be decided. And yet, he wasn't reckless. He didn't rush into war. He restrained himself. Even when he had overwhelming power, he waited. And when the time was right, he moved. In 1864, he drew Austria into a war with Denmark over the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. But really, it was a test and a way to assess Austria's military and lay the ground for the isolation. Then, in 1866, came the Austro-Prussian War. Quick, brutal, decisive. Bismarck crushed Austria, but he refused to march into Vienna. Why? Because he knew that humiliating Austria too much would drive them into the arms of France or Russia. Victory with restraint, it was his signature. And then, at last, the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, Bismarck manipulated a diplomatic insult, the Ems dispatch, to provoke France into declaring war. This wasn't luck, it was orchestration. France looked like the aggressor. The southern German states, fearing Napoleon III, sided with Prussia. The war united the German peoples in blood and victory, and in 1871, in the grand hall of mirrors at Versailles, deep inside defeated France, the dream was made real. The German Empire was born. William I, King of Prussia, was crowned Kaiser. But here's the twist. Even after all that, not all German-speaking peoples were part of his new empire. Millions still lived outside its borders, in Austria, in Switzerland, and in the scattered lands of the Habsburgs and beyond. Bismarck stopped short. He did not try to absorb Austria with its millions of German speakers. He did not demand South Tyrol or reach into German-speaking Switzerland. He kept his empire tightly focused, fearing that too much expansion will create too many enemies. He believed peace after victory was the real triumph. But what if he hadn't? What if Bismarck had kept going? What if he had tried to unite all the German-speaking peoples, not just in Prussia and Bavaria and the southern states, but in Austria, Switzerland, the Sudetenland, even Luxembourg? Cause let's be for real, he really wouldn't touch scattered through the Eastern Europe. What if the man who played Europe like a chess had decided to go for the checkmate? Let's explore a world where Bismarck didn't stop, a world where the German Empire became something far greater and far more dangerous. So today, let's ask this question. What if Bismarck hadn't stopped where he did? What if he had pushed further and united every German-speaking people into one colossal German superstate? Let's explore a very different 19th century and a very different Europe. But of course, history doesn't bend easily. The unification Bismarck achieved was a masterstroke, but it was also the product of a fragile, precise balance. A single shift, a single wrong move might have toppled the entire game. So, to imagine a Germany even larger, even more unified, we must first adjust the rules of the board a little bit. Before we enter this new timeline, I've chosen 3 key changes, subtle enough to not break history but powerful enough to reshape its path. So the first change, a bloodier Napoleonic War. In this timeline, the war that tore Europe apart in the 1800s burned even longer and deeper. The devastation is greater. From Spain to Russia, the continent is left traumatized and weary of grand continental wars. The great powers, France, Britain, Prussia, Austria, all remember the horror, and in doing so, they begin to fear escalation more than defeat. This will echo later when Germany starts to rise. The second change, no Hungarian compromise. In this timeline, after the Austro-Prussian War in 1866, Bismarck plays his hand with ruthless persuasion. Behind closed doors, he convinces the defeated Habsburg to hold firm. No shared throne, no dual monarchy. The empire remains the Austrian Empire, ruled solely by the German-speaking Habsburgs. But that unity comes at a cost. Without recognition, the Hungarians simmer with resentment. The Slavs and Czechs grow restless. The empire's grip weakens. And with rising unrest, Austria leans more and more on its northern cousin, Prussia. A German union begins to look less like a vision and more like a necessity. And the third change, Switzerland and Belgium no longer so neutral. In this world, the fire of revolution finds safe harbor. Switzerland, officially neutral, secretly backs nationalist uprising across Europe. They smuggle arms, shelter dissidents, and even lend quiet support to Garibaldi's campaign to unify Italy. Belgium, small but bold, has its own internal spark. In this timeline, the revolutionary group Riscontout succeeds. The monarchy is overthrown. Belgium becomes a radical republic, a beacon for exiles and agitators alike. With that, the old guarantees, like Britain's sacred defense of Belgian neutrality, begins to fade. The untouchables of Europe are no longer so untouchable. These 3 changes reshape the mood of Europe. War is feared, unity is fragile, and revolution is contagious. In this volatile, anxious world that Otto von Bismarck makes his move, not just to unite Germany, but truly unify all the German-speaking peoples under one flag. Now let us enter the timeline. It's the fall of 1870, and the cannons of war thunder across the fields of Sedan. The Franco-Prussian War, an eruption of pride, fear, and calculation, has reached its brutal turning point. The French army, led in person by Emperor Napoleon III, finds itself surrounded. The Prussians close in, supplies dwindle, hope fades, and what follows is supposed to be the end of an empire. In our timeline, this moment, the Battle of Sedan was a catastrophe. The French army was crushed, and the emperor was captured, taken prisoner by the very Germans he sought to humble. This second French empire collapsed, and in the chaos the Third Republic was declared in Paris. Napoleon's third dreams of restoring France's natural borders died in a German prison. But In this timeline, things unfold a little differently. Days before Sedan, Napoleon III, exhausted and painfully aware the defeat is looming, he takes one final desperate step to preserve his legacy and his dynasty. He abdicates the throne, not to exile, not to shame, but to his only son, Louis Napoleon, a boy of just 14, but no ordinary child. The young prince was raised with the weight of history on his shoulder, fluent in languages, trained in military science, immersed in the writing of his uncle, the legendary Napoleon Bonaparte. He was raised not only to rule, but to understand power. He admired the British constitutional model, believed in social progress, and dreamed of leading not as a tyrant, but as a people's emperor. And now, with France burning and the empire collapsing, he becomes Napoleon IV, in name, if not yet in command. A regency council is quickly formed, just as Napoleon III had long intended. At its head, Empress Eugenie, capable political mind, alongside a circle of Bonapartist officials. The French army still fights in Sedan, and yes, Napoleon III still leads it and still surrenders. He becomes a captive of Prussians, but this time France does not lose its crown, because the crown has already passed, and with a functioning government still in place in Paris, the Republicans are slowed, if not silenced. The revolutionary fervor that once seized the streets now simmers instead of exploding. There is anger, yes, but also order. France still has a throne. France still has a future. The Regency government, weakened but intact, sues for peace with Bismarck, and the terms, cruel though they are, remain largely unchanged from our timeline. The Germans besiege Paris, they annex Alsace-Lorraine, and in the glittering Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, William I is crowned Kaiser of a newly united German Empire. But while Germany is born in triumph, France does not die in disgrace. Instead, the Bonapartist regime reframes the moment. The Prince Imperial becomes a symbol of national rebirth, a new Napoleon for a new age. The peace is branded not as a surrender, but as a temporary setback, a necessary humiliation to preserve the empire and rise stronger tomorrow. And for the Germans, this too is a quieter victory. There is no Paris Commune, no revolutionary collapse, no prolonged occupation. France limps away wounded, but stable, and Bismarck, ever the pragmatist, accepts this. He doesn't want to crush France forever, he wants to build Germany, not to inherit a permanent enemy. And so, as 1871 dawns, a fragile balance returns to Europe. A new German empire stands proud in Central Europe, but its neighbors are changed. To the west, France has not fallen into republicanism, but into reform. A young emperor is waiting, a monarchy humbled, but alive. And so to the south, Austria, still licking its wounds from the last war, begins to lean ever so slightly toward Germany. The pieces are shifting, the map is not yet finished, and Bismarck is watching. With the ink still drying on the peace accords and the cannon smoke barely cleared from the hills outside Paris, both empires, German and French, begins to reshape themselves. In France, the Regency Council wastes no time. Determined to avoid the revolutionary collapse of the past, they begin modernizing. Under Empress Eugenie's careful stewardship, a new constitution is drafted, establishing a senate, a parliament, and a more transparent government. Power is still tightly held, but the appearance of reform becomes the shield of legitimacy. The young Napoleon IV, though not yet of age, becomes a symbol of France's future. Educated, eloquent, and open to liberal constitutionalism, he speaks of progress, of reform, of revival. The empire, now bloodied but breathing, launches ambitious rural reforms, expands the public education system, and pours funds into the infrastructure projects. It is a wounded empire, but not a dying one. It is waiting. Meanwhile, Otto von Bismarck, with the German Empire newly declared, stands proud. But for Bismarck, this is not the end of a journey. It is the middle, though. The German unification he just achieved, but still incomplete. And so, in quiet rooms, behind locked doors, Bismarck begins to look for the past in order to plot the future. Eyes settle on a small strategic prize, Luxembourg. Luxembourg is tiny, but its history is heavy. Back in 1839, it was torn in two. The eastern part remained under the Grand Duke, then in personal union with the Dutch crown. The western half given to Belgium, a humiliation. Many German nationalists believe, especially as Luxembourg had long been part of German cultural sphere. In 1860s, Bismarck had tried to bring it in. He failed. The 1867 Luxembourg crisis nearly brought war with France and Britain, and the Treaty of London declared Luxembourg neutral, and Prussian troops were withdrawn. But Bismarck never forgot Luxembourg, and now, with France weakened, Britain distant, and Europe distracted, he makes his move. In 1872, under the guise of a quiet diplomatic retreat, Bismarck invites Luxembourgish envoys, and eventually the Grand Duke himself, to the German city of Trier. It is there that a secret agreement is born. Bismarck promises the full restoration of Luxembourg pre-1839 borders. The Belgian province of Luxembourg, now largely French-speaking in government, but still deeply rooted in Luxembourgish and rural traditions, would be returned to the Grand Duchy. In exchange, Luxembourg agrees to join the German Empire, not immediately, not openly, but through a carefully managed referendum held quietly and legally within 5 to 8 years, when the time is right. Until then, the illusion of independence will preserve. The neutrality left over from 1867 will remain undisturbed on the surface. It is Bismarck at his most brilliant. No armies, no immediate flag raised, just strategy and silence. And why Luxembourg? Because Bismarck sees more than territory, he sees a symbol, a fracture from the past that can now be repaired, a German-speaking land, long divided, now returning peacefully to the fold. And more importantly, he sees Belgium's vulnerability. In this timeline, Belgium is no longer a protected monarchy, but a radical republic. The revolutionary success of Riscon II has made it a beacon for reformers and a threat to old order. Britain no longer rushes to defend it. Luxembourg is the first test. If the world does not react, more steps will follow. And for Bismarck, every quiet move is a part of a larger plan to not just preserve German unity, but to complete it. By the mid-1870s, Europe is still standing. Pressure is building. Ideologies clash. Borders blur. And in the heart of the continent, two small nations, Switzerland and Belgium, on the edge of collapse. Their neutrality, once sacred, has eroded. Their governments, once stable, now sympathize quietly with revolutionaries across Europe. Switzerland supports uprising from afar. Belgium, it explodes. In 1872, the spark ignites in Wallonia. A general strike, massive and organized, erupts across the coal mines in steel works of southern Belgium. It begins as a labor movement fueled by hunger, poor wages, and revolutionary whispers. But quickly it becomes more. Armed workers seize control of Liege. The railways are blockaded. In Brussels, socialists and communards storm the government, declaring the formation of a Belgian Workers' Republic. The monarchy is long gone, overthrown years earlier, but now, even the Republican state fractures into chaos. The world watches and Bismarck moves. Germany, backed quietly by France and Austria, accuses the Belgian uprising of exporting socialist insurrection across the Rhine. Britain does not intervene. Thousands of exiles flee to London, New York, but most to Geneva. The Belgian uprising is brutally crushed, not just by its own army, but by foreign pressure, and in the aftermath, Bismarck seizes the opportunity he has waited for. He invites some of the powers of Europe, Britain, France, Netherlands, Luxembourg and Austria, to a diplomatic summit held once again in Trier. On paper, the goal is peace. In reality, the goal is partition. Bismarck presents it as a rational reordering, a peaceful, lawful reshaping of Europe, he calls it, to match peoples with their languages, nations with their rules. But this is not a simple map to draw, because everyone wants the Meuse, a river that winds through Belgium into France and Netherlands. The Meuse is not just water, it is a road, a corridor for armies, a channel for trade, a dagger pointed at the Rhineland, or Paris, depending on who holds it. Paris argues that because they speak their tongue, they are theirs by culture, by blood. Germany counters, citing strategic depth, security and danger of socialism on its doorstep. The Rhineland must be protected, Bismarck insists. And then there is Britain, watching the chessboard more carefully than anyone. If France controls the whole of Wallonia, it dominates the Meuse and sits one step away from Germany's industrial core. If Germany controls eastern Belgium, it gives a straight corridor to northern France and the Low Countries, and also threatens Britain itself. And so Britain draws a line, a red one. No one power, they warn, will be allowed to control the Meuse. Bismarck understands. He doesn't fight, he absorbs it, and he offers a compromise so subtle, so stable, that even Britain cannot object. Let the Netherlands take the Meuse. The Dutch, seen as a neutral, weak and historically linked to the region, are the perfect buffer. In fact, they ruled Belgium before 1830. Britain had helped create that union at the Congress of Vienna after all. Now they help restore it, in part. The Treaty of Trier is signed in 1872. It is not called a partition, but a reunification. France received whole of Wallonia, but not the strategic Meuse corridor. The Netherlands annexes Flanders and most critically the Meuse Basin. Luxembourg is awarded the Belgian province of Luxembourg, finally restoring the Grand Duchy to its pre-1839 border, as Bismarck promised. To the public, Bismarck announces, this is not conquest, this is healing the wounds of 1839. But behind his careful words, real game reveals itself. France now has a larger border directly with Germany, without a Belgian buffer. The Dutch are stagnant, but beholden to the German protection. Luxembourg is expanded, loyal and quietly preparing for full integration. The map has changed, not with armies, not with fire, but with ink. And Bismarck once again has moved Europe like pieces on a chessboard, one calculated step closer to a greater German order. The year is 1875. France is a nation still healing from the defeat of 1870, still whispering of greatness, still watching the Rhine with quiet burning eyes, and now it has a new emperor. Napoleon IV has come of age. For years, he has stood as a symbol, a king beneath the regency's shadow, a reminder of old empire's dignity, a promise of a future empire reborn. But now the regency ends, and with a solemn oath in the heart of Paris, the empire of France is reborn, not just in form, but in will. He is no longer a symbol, he is the state. And for his first days of the throne, he makes one thing clear: he is not his father. He does not rule through whim or personal grandeur. He is not seduced by dreams or natural frontiers or reckless glory, where Napoleon III saw Europe as a chessboard for dynasties. Napoleon IV sees it as a stage for modern strength. Under his rule, the Second Empire becomes something new, a hybrid of old Bonapartist values in 19th century reforms, a regime of imperial modernization, not personal dictatorship, more stable than his father's empire. Schools expand, military academies modernize, industry is prioritized, and above all, the army grows, not for conquest, not yet, but for something far more personal. Deep in Napoleon IV's heart lies a wound he never forgot: Alsace-Lorraine. The province is ripped from France by Bismarck in 1871, the moment that shattered the empire, the moment his father surrendered to a foreign power and lost the crown. To reclaim Alsace is to redeem the Bonaparte name. To reclaim Alsace is to undo Sedan. And so, though he speaks of peace, though he avoids open conflict, everything he builds aims toward one eventual goal: the return of Alsace-Lorraine. But unlike the old Bonapartist dream of Rhine frontier, Napoleon IV is strategic, not delusional. He rejects expansionism. He does not call for annexation of the Rhineland. He knows that reviving the vision of natural borders would only unite Europe against him again. Instead, he focuses on the nation's eye on a single, righteous mission: to liberate the Alsatians, to restore what was taken, not seize what was never theirs. And so begins the quiet campaign, a massive propaganda effort, painting the Alsatians not as Germans, but as kidnapped French citizens. The building of a modern professional army, trained, disciplined, and equipped for future confrontation. Diplomatic restraint, carefully avoiding alliances that would isolate France or invite war too soon. The emperor waits and watches. He will not be the man who rushes into disaster like his father. He will be the man who strikes when the enemy is weak and when the world is ready to see France not as an aggressor, but as a liberator. And the world is changing. Germany grows stronger, yes, but also more entangled. Austria leans toward them. Switzerland is shaken. Belgium no longer exists. The map of Europe has already started to shift under Bismarck's hand. One day, it will shift again. And when that day comes, Napoleon IV will be ready. Not to claim vengeance, not to claim justice, but to redeem the nation, to redeem the name. After a few months, Europe is not at war, but peace is being broken with pens instead of swords. After Belgium was partitioned a few years ago, but the fires of revolution have not been extinguished, they've only moved eastward. The next spark ignites in a place once thought untouchable, a land of mountains and quiet neutrality: Switzerland. The match is struck in Geneva, a city overflowing with exiles. From Belgium, from France, from shattered fringes of Europe, it hosts the first Pan-European Socialist Congress, a gathering of radicals, anarchists, trade unionists, and utopians. Secret plans are whispered, maps redrawn. They speak not of nations, but of class and revolution. And soon those whispers spread. Bohemia begins to stir. In Tyrol, communes grow restless. In Austria, panic. In Berlin fury, Bismarck does not wait. What follows is not a war, but a treaty, a cold, clean partition at the Treaty of Strasbourg in 1875. The signatories Germany, Austria, France, Italy, Switzerland is erased. Romandy, the French-speaking west is annexed by France. Ticino and other Italian-speaking pockets are handed to the Kingdom of Italy. Penzl and St. Gallen are absorbed into the Austrian Empire as a gesture of goodwill. The rest of German-speaking cantons, including Zurich, Lucerne, and Bern, are claimed by the German Empire. And in the span of few years, two nations have vanished. Belgium shattered and carved apart by its neighbors. Switzerland broken by revolution and sliced up under the guise of stability. The map of Europe has changed again, but more than borders have shifted. Ideas are dying. The idea that small states can survive between great empires, the idea that neutrality is sacred, the idea that revolution will be tolerated. And Bismarck? He says nothing of conquest. He calls it cultural realignment, and the balance of power was preserved for now. But while Europe argued over the Balkans, Bismarck remembered Luxembourg. 2 years later, in 1880, the world was no longer watching fires of revolution. Had cooled. Belgium and Switzerland were already rearranged on the map. France had Alsace-Lorraine on its mind. Britain was busy with imperial concerns. Austria was watching the Balkans. And in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, a quiet vote was called. Not a coup, not an invasion, just one question. Do you support joining the German Empire as a fully Grand Duchy within the federal system? Luxembourg's elite, carefully cultivated over the past decade, voiced open support. The newspaper spoke of security, modern railways, economic revival. Prussian officials already training in the army offered scholarship, trade deals, and future. And when the votes were counted, 65 to 75% votes said yes. There was no outcry from London, no protest from Paris. After all, it had been years since the Belgian partition. Luxembourg had already been integrating with Germany. German was the language of instruction. Prussian officers were in command. German goods flew freely across the border. And most importantly, this wasn't war, it was a plebiscite, a choice, a peaceful shift. What nation would go to war over a vote? And so, Luxembourg quietly disappeared from the ranks of the independent. Its flag remained, its name remained, but it was now a Grand Duchy within the German Empire, fully federated, fully bound to Berlin. Roads were widened, German rail lines connected the duchy to the Rhine. New schools taught Prussian discipline and German tongue. Prosperity followed as did power. The people adjusted, the map changed, and no one noticed. This is how Bismarck worked. When he didn't need armies, not with bullets, but with votes, not through conquest, but consent, manufactured over time. Luxembourg was not taken, it was prepared. And when the moment came, Bismarck simply opened the door and let them walk through. One by one, the German-speaking lands were coming home. It was 1894, and the dust settled across Europe. From the Luxembourg plebiscite and the fires of rebellion dimmed in Belgium and Switzerland, Africa was calling. And the colonial powers of Europe gathered in Berlin once again. This time not to discuss Europe's future, but Africa's fate. The Berlin Conference, a grand gathering of diplomats, cartographers, and imperial schemers. Its purpose? To divide unexplored interiors of Africa like jigsaw puzzle. To carve borders on maps, with zero regard for river, tribes, or history. To avoid war not with Africans, but with each other. But this time was different. In our timeline, Belgium's King Leopold II seized the moment. Clothed in fake philanthropy and ghost charities, he manipulated the powers into guaranteeing him personal dominion over the Congo Basin. A kingdom for one man. But here in this timeline, Belgium doesn't exist. Partition dissolved. Leopold was no king, just an exiled aristocrat. His ambitions died in Brussels, not in Africa. And so, there was no Congo Free State, no rubber terror, no genocide hidden behind flags, no King Leopold statue to ever tear down. In its place, Bismarck offered something radical for the era, an international Congo zone, a compromise that preserved the balance of power, a solution for a land rich to give to any other nation. But this international zone was not neutral in modern sense. It was sliced and subdivided by trade deals and concessions, spheres of influence like a pie of greed and minerals. The division of Congo, Katanaga, the glittering prize of copper, cobalt, and uranium, fell under German economic control. Bas-Congo, its strategic Atlantic ports became a Dutch enclave, reviving the Netherlands as a colonial power. Stanleyville was handed to a joint administration. France solidified claims in the equator and the Mongala forests, expanding French equatorial Africa. Germany secured Cameroon, Namibia, expanded their holdings in Tanganyika. Britain kept their hands on Nigeria, Ghana, and claimed rich inland areas of Kivu and Ituri. So now the year is 1885. As the dust settled over the Berlin Conference and Europe carved up Africa with straight lines, steady hands, something far older, far closer, was beginning to come undone. The Austrian Empire, long a brittle patchwork of languages, flags, and loyalties, stood on the edge of collapse, and the final push, it came not from France, not from Germany, but from the Balkans. When Bulgaria unified with Eastern Rumelia, it shattered the fragile balance of power in southeastern Europe. Serbia was humiliated, and Austria looked weak. And for its many restless people, from the Slavs to the Magyars, Romanians, without the dual monarchy in the Hungarian Compromise of 1867, there was no safety, no cooperation between Austria and Hungary. Instead, there was silence in Vienna and thunder on the borders. The collapse was swift and total. Bosnia and Herzegovina, still officially Ottoman, but long occupied by Austria, erupted with no one left to hold it. Slavic militia, many backed by Serbia, flooded the territory. In the fighting that followed, the Ottomans tried to return, but they were too weak. Serbia stepped in, not as a conqueror, but as a protector. Bosnia would become a Serbian client state, or a Slavic republic forged in blood and ambition. To the south in Sanjak of Novi Pazar, the chaos drew in Serbia and Montenegro. Eager to connect their territories and claim this strategic land, they moved quickly, cutting up the map before Ottomans could react. Only the southern tip remained under Ottoman control, barely. Hungary, long resentful of Austrian dominance, declared full independence. It claimed the historical territories, including Transylvania, as its own and prepared to defend it. But on the other side, Romanian nationalists stirred, calling for unification, calling for war. For now, Hungary held the land, but tensions simmered like steam behind steel. When the Austrian Empire shattered in 1886, it was not with an explosion, but a quiet crumbling, like a porcelain vase dropped from a great height. A pause, a gasp, and then fracture after fracture spreading across the map. And Bismarck, ever the master of timing, did not let the moment pass by him. To the world he presented it is not conquest, but a salvation. The German-speaking people of Austria, abandoned by Vienna and surrounded by chaos, now called out to Berlin for unity, for order, for protection, and Bismarck, with solemn precision, answered. This was not romantic vision of a greater Germany. Bismarck was a strategist, not a dreamer. He had long feared the creation of a strong centralized Austria within the German Empire. Such a state anchored by Vienna could one day rival Prussia itself. That would never do. So Bismarck chose division over unification. Not one Austria, but many Austrias. The map of old Habsburg Germany was redrawn with surgical care. The Duchy of Styria, nested in the green valley of southeast, was restored. The Grand Duchy of Tyrol was carved out next, including the snow-bound peaks of Vorarlberg. Its people loyal, its mountains strategic. Carinthia, long a borderland, became a duchy on its own right. The city and region of Salzburg, with its musical fame and ecclesiastical history, was even floated as a revived blend. Upper and Lower Austria, heartlands of Habsburg power, were split, each now ruled by loyal governors approved in Berlin. And at the center of it all, Vienna. Once the beating heart of an empire, Vienna now stood alone. Bismarck refused to make it a capital again. Instead, it became an imperial city, directly administered, heavily watched, and quietly neutralized. Its grandeur was preserved, but its influence dismantled. The illusion of federalism was maintained. Each new duchy of principality kept its flag, its court, even its noble titles, but the real power, military, financial, political, flowed northward, always to Berlin. And in doing this, he accomplished what the Habsburg never could. He united the German-speaking people without uniting Austria. There were no rebellions, no grand wars. The Austrian Germans, exhausted by chaos, accepted the Prussian hand. Some saw it as humiliation, others as liberation, more simply as survival, and across Europe the message was clear. The German Empire had grown again, not by conquest, but by calculation. Bismarck's brilliance lay not in how he took, but in what he chose not to take. No Slavic lands, no Hungarian plains, no Balkan entanglements, and let Italy have the Italian-speaking parts of Trentino. He took only the German lands, and even those broken into manageable pieces, ensuring no single province could ever challenge Prussian supremacy. Now he applied the same playbook to Austria's remnants: fragment the strong, reward the loyal, rule through cooperation, but always rule. The Austrian Empire was gone, but its German bones had been repurposed, reforged into something leaner, sharper, and entirely Prussian, and for the first time in centuries, German-speaking world stood under one imperial crown. Meanwhile, to the west, Italy smelled of opportunity. The old Habsburg territories had long been its obsession. South Tyrol, Trentino, Istria, and the Dalmatian coast, once part of the Venetian Republic, now ripe for the taking. Italian troops swept into South Tyrol and Trentino. The Istrian peninsula fell next, claiming it for Rome, with little resistance. But in Dalmatia, Italy hit a wall. Serbian and Montenegrin forces were already there, declaring coast part of their South Slav destiny. Italy's army was still small and it had no interest in a Balkan quagmire. For now it was content to become the dominant naval power of the Adriatic. Across the Balkans, all eyes turned to Bulgaria, now larger, bolder, and freshly unified. But Bulgaria did not move. Though the moment was ripe, the memory of 1885 still burned. Russia, once its protector, now scorned it for acting independently. Tsar Alexander III had withdrawn Russian officers from Bulgarian army. He watched closely, and his message was clear: do not test us again. So Bulgaria mobilized, but did not invade. It steered toward Macedonia and Thrace, but kept its troops at home. The Balkans boiled and Bulgaria waited. And what about Slovenia? Though once tied to Austria economically, it was culturally Slavic. There was no strong German claim here. Despite Austrian encouragement, Bismarck, ever cautious, noted that any annexation of Slavic land might provoke Russia, so Germany held back. Slovenia, meanwhile, began drifting towards its South Slav cousins, not yet independent but no longer Austrian either. So the Slovene Croats, no longer willing to bow to a dead empire or a distant Vienna, turned toward one another. A new idea was rising: South Slav unity, the old Illyrian dream, reborn in real time. Not yet a full Yugoslavia, but the shape was forming. In the west, the Czech lands, Bohemia and Moravia seized their moment. The Czech people proclaimed a free republic, culturally Slavic, industrially modern, and politically aligned with Bismarck Germany, not conquered, courted. Meanwhile, Romania, seizing the moment, surged forward with dreams of uniting all Romanians. But they found their path blocked, not by Hungarians themselves, but by the looming shadow of Berlin. Hungary, unlike Austria, did not collapse completely. In the face of fragmentation, Hungary elites regrouped, rallied, and declared the sovereign kingdom of Hungary. Their goal was clear: preserve the historic boundaries of Hungarian crowns, even if it meant fighting off Romanian and Slavic claims. And to their surprise, they found allies in high places. In Germany, Bismarck had no illusions about the Hungarians. They were proud, difficult, and often resentful of German power. But in the great geopolitical game, they were useful. A strong, stable Hungary, German-friendly, militarily capable, and fiercely anti-Slav, was a vital buffer between Berlin and the rising Slavic tide and the Balkans. The alternative? Balkan patchwork of Serb, Croat, Romanian, Slovak, and Ruthenian states, each one potential flashpoint for pan-Slavism, revolution or worse, Russian intervention. So, behind the scenes, Germany backed Hungary, diplomatically, economically, perhaps even with a quiet military aid. It was not love, it was necessity. And what of Russia? Tsar Alexander III had no affection for Hungary, but he too feared chaos more than any king. A crumbling Hungary might unleash ethnic uprising along the Carpathians. It might inspire revolts in Galicia, spark border war with Romania, or invite France or Britain to meddle in the Balkans. So even as Russia supported Slavic aspirations, it did not want them unchecked. A too powerful Serbia, dangerous. An expanded Romania, risky. A Balkan war dragging in the Ottomans or the Germans, unacceptable. Thus, the Russian court played a cautious game. It opposed a fully German-dominated Hungary, but it supported a neutral, stable and conservative Hungary that could act as a brake on both German expansion and Slavic overreach. For Serbia, it was a historic opportunity, a once-in-a-generation chance to forge a greater Serbia, perhaps even the foundation of a Yugoslav confederation. And so, Serbia moved swiftly. First came Bosnia, where Slavic uprising had already begun. Serbian volunteers poured across the Drina River, welcome as liberators. Montenegro, bound by blood and history, quickly aligned itself with Belgrade's vision. Together, the two states began to speak openly of unity of a common Slavic homeland. In Croatia, chaos reigned. The collapse of Habsburg control left a void, and Serbian-backed groups filled it, especially in the inland regions and borderlands. Galicia had been complicated wedge of empires, a patchwork of Poles, Ruthenians, Jews, and Austrians. Overlooked but deeply symbolic. Now it was unguarded, stateless, and exposed. Russian troops crossed the border not with blaring trumpets, but with a quiet, disciplined march. There was no Austrian army to stop them, no Polish Republic to defend it, no German protest. Bismarck had eyes elsewhere, and no French resistance. Their influence ended long before the Carpathians. The Tsar declared the annexation of Galicia. The Orthodox Church was quick to send priests. Russian officials arrived soon after. The message was clear: Galicia is theirs now. But Russia knew this act might ripple outward. Romania, watching nervously from the southeast, has also been eyeing Austrian collapse, especially in Transylvania. Yet their advance had stalled, checked by rising Hungary and subtle German pressure. Bucharest needed a win, something to justify their ambition without crossing Berlin. So the Tsar offered a deal: stand down in Transylvania and take Bukovina instead. Bukovina, a small but rich borderland, had been Habsburg territory since late 1700s. Romanian-speaking, Slavic-infused Orthodox rooted, it fit naturally with Romanian identity. The offer was generous and strategic. It gave Romania a symbolic victory without sparking a broader war. It carved out space between Russia and Hungary, and it preserved the fragile Slavic-Hungarian balance. In exchange, Bucharest halted its push into Transylvania, for now at least. To Germany, this was tolerable. Bismarck saw Galicia as a loss not worth contesting, full of Slavs and difficult. He noted Russia's action but said nothing. The price of Russian silence in the Balkans was often paid in the east, and Bukovina a small concession to keep Romania satisfied. And out of a full-scale war with Hungary. So with Russian and German backing, Hungary survived, not as a part of a dual monarchy, not as an imperial partner, but as a lone kingdom, popped up by two rival powers, who mistrusted each other but feared instability more. And so the Balkans, that restless frontier of Europe, became a chessboard once more. On one side, Serbia, bold and ambitious, weaving together South Slav and dreaming of a Southern Union. On the other hand, Hungary, scattered but intact, standing firm, with Berlin's quiet support and St. Petersburg's wary watch. Romania hemmed in, took only a sliver of southern Transylvania, enough to save face, not enough to provoke war. Slovenia weaved not yet to reap, but already leaning toward its Slavic kin. As the dust settled over the fractured heart of Europe, the old empires had vanished, but the power centers had emerged. Germany in the north, Serbia in the south, Hungary in the center, and Russia, ever patient, ever watchful, waiting to see which flame will burn too brightly and when it might be time to act. And so the man who once unified the German people, now gazing over a continent he did not merely shape, he rebalanced, reimagined it, and it's time for him to stand down. But power now passes to William II, young, proud, eager for glory, and Bismarck, with resignation in hand and Europe hanging by a thread, offers one last gift: warnings. Shaped by experience, hold the crown lands lightly. Rule the Germans, not the map. The empire ends where German speech ends. If we reach beyond, we rule shadows, not men. The old ocean crownlands are yours now. Don't try to force Berlin into Vienna bones. Rule with a federal hand, let the locals breathe. Keep the Czech and Magyars close or the Slavs will take them. The Danube is no longer our problem, but if we let it fester, it will become once again. Hungary and Bohemia have survived in the Austrian collapse. They are nervous and proud and deeply strategic. Do not poke the Slavs. The Balkans are a trap. We removed Austria to avoid Balkan wars. Don't become the new Vienna. The Balkans are restless, anxious, and poisoned by ambitions. Let Serbia and Bulgaria fight their own battles. Keep Russia reassured. As long as St. Petersburg sees Berlin as a partner, France cannot win. The reassurance treaty is quiet, but it's golden. As long as Russia is calm, Europe is calm. Britain is not your enemy. Their navy can blockade your glory. Let them rule the seas. Britain needs no war, but it hates rivals, and so the Iron Chancellor exits the stage. Not with thunder, but with a whisper of warnings. The German Empire, once a dream of unity, now stands as the quiet master of fragile new order. It stretches from the North Sea to the Alps, from Bohemia to the Balkans, surrounded not by enemies but uncertainties. Bismarck has reshaped Europe, not through conquest, not through containment of ambition of chaos, not of destiny itself. He has toppled empires and built a web of successor states, held together by trade, diplomacy, and delicate fear. But as he steps away, the question looms: will the young Kaiser listen? Will Germany remain the calm center of Europe? Or will William II chase glory and unravel what Bismarck so carefully bound? Serbia stirs, Russia watches, Britain listens from across the channel, Napoleon IV waiting for the moment to take Alsace-Lorraine. And somewhere in Vienna and the hills of Hungary, old ghosts begin to murmur again. The map has changed. The story is new, but history never stays still for long. Thank you so much for watching and walking through this alternate timeline with me. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own theories in the comments, because this is only the beginning. Eventually, sometime in the future, or when this video gets 100 likes, I'll do a second part.